Hi folks, we're talking about incident response. So any large organization needs to have plans in place for what they're going to do and how they're going to respond, how they're going to investigate when something goes wrong, when they have a security breach, when there is a security incident. So it's really important that there are procedures in place and that there's the training and the everyone's prepared for what they need to do when something goes wrong. And depending on the size of the organization, the teams that deal with the incidents might be active a lot of the time, and you might see that there are attacks that happen, successful or not, quite consistently, and there will be some places where those teams are doing a lot of work investigating, and other times in smaller organizations maybe they're less so, but we're going to talk about what that involves, what the processes are, the people involved, and some of the kind of legal and regulatory aspects, or introduce some of those things that you need to be aware of. So incident response involves detecting that something has actually happened and doing something about it, actually responding, and then basically taking stock of where you're at, potentially improve the countermeasures that you have in place and the defences, and then go about detecting the next attack. Because incidents happen, really we have to assume that the worst is going to happen. We're going to have a security breach. Obviously we work really hard to provide layered defences, and we do all the technical things to get the right technical controls in place. We try and provide training to people to make sure that they're doing the right thing as well. But a well equipped attacker will typically eventually succeed if they're targeted enough and have enough resources. So we need to make sure that we're planning for the security and what we're going to do in that case. So calls for a car analogy. So say we've got a burning car. We don't all just stand around. Basically, when the fire department arrive, they know what they're doing. The team reacts quickly in an organised and also a calm manner, because it doesn't help in those situations to start panicking. And one of the ways that you can avoid panicking is to be well prepared and have a plan. And each person needs to have a role, and the response then needs to be appropriate to the incident that's actually taking place. So you take stock, consider what, hopefully you've already done the planning, you've done your risk assessments in the past, you've considered what you're going to do in these situations, and you put that into effect. And if not, you just have a calm and collected approach where you have a decision-making process where you decide what you're going to do about the attack and the compromise. So a security incident can be defined as an event that compromises an organization's confidentiality, integrity, or availability, or just more generally any security-related event that you need to handle, something you need to do about. So it could be that it's all internal to your organization and there's disgruntled employee within the network that does something, or it could be external, where there are clients involved as well, and you need to kind of interact with external clients or stakeholders as part of your incident response. So it's an important process, and we need to have ways of detecting incidents, assessing and reacting. And there should be a team, or at least someone, that's prepared to deal with the incidents. And we need to be able to deal with attacks, either externally or internally. So an incident response team, or an IRT, there's a whole bunch of other names that can be used, like a CERT or a CERT or an ERT. So there's that's the Computer Incident Response Team, Computer Emergency Response Team, or the Emergency Response Team. They all basically mean the exact same thing. I think one of those certs is actually a trademark, but it does get used by some organizations for their emergency response team. Basically, in a large enough organization, you'll typically have a number of people that are like officially members of the incident response team, and their time is dedicated to some extent to dealing with the cybersecurity incidents. So the way that we can improve the success of our incident response team is to basically have awareness of the incident response team within the organization. And that means having like internal websites and meetings, posters. That after an incident, it helps if the incident response team circulates that information of what happened, how it was resolved to the organization, as like an organization-wide email, for example, just so that people are aware that that's what they're doing. So also it helps that people get a feel for what those processes are and who the people are that are involved. Also, the sense that they have some authority when actually dealing with incidents, and that involves having management support for those processes. So you can either have a real team or a virtual team. I'm not talking about virtual as in on the internet, talking virtual as in assembled as it's needed. So you can have a real team that has a manager and a budget. So they've got it's their job, it's in their role description of this is what they do, they're being paid, and there's a budget for the work that they're doing. Or it could be a lot less formal. In some organizations, you've just got some people that are technical or that have the skills to do the response to the incident, and then they are called upon to, Avengers assemble, and you all get together and form an incident response team as it's needed. So they're not permanent members of the team. And so the advantages of a virtual team is that you can create the team based on what you need for the incident that's happening. But the disadvantages include the fact that it takes longer to start the team up each time, and you'll have team members that are busy with other things if it's not their main job. And also, if they're not often called upon to be in the incident response team, the procedures might basically be a bit rusty. They might need to actually get up to speed with these things in order to get going. And also, just more generally, managers, if their line manager doesn't see it as a priority, then it might be like organizationally, you might not have the incentives to for it to be smooth as a transition, because there are conflicting interests. So the sorts of procedures that you should have in place include defining how you go about classifying, triaging, and handling an incident, the scope of the incidents that the incident response team handles, how and when people are informed, how information is stored. So, for example, that you store it securely using encryption, and you have these as policies, because obviously there could be some security sensitive information as part of that. How you're going to deal outside parties. So if you've got outsourcing, there's legal jurisdiction issues. If you're being attacked, for example, externally, there's a response strategy, which you would determine as part of the risk management process. Like, what are you going to do as in response to these risks? We're going to mention later on around your legal or regulatory requirements. So, for example, things like GDPR, which require you to report on data breaches and things like that. So these are all the things that we need as part of our procedures. So, but either way, our procedures should be methodical and well documented, and the better your procedures are documented and clearly followed, it can help if you're trying to defend actions in court. Both if you're trying to present evidence, but also if you're someone claimed that the company was, for example, not providing an adequate level of security and doing things in an adequate way, then if you've got everything clearly documented, then that helps you build your case. You can use a formal methodology like the PDC ERF incident response methodology, PDCERF, so that can be used or adapted, and the steps within that are preparation, detection, containment, eradication, recovery, and follow-up. Most of those terms are pretty self-explanatory. But when we are talking about detection, that can include how we go about monitoring to detect the threats that are happening. So, for example, we've got intrusion detection systems, integrity management, doing file integrity management, monitoring logs, and preferably using centralized logging and a SIEM system. We have general system administration, like monitoring of the individual systems within our network. And we're going to cover those in various topics going forward. And then we, as an incident response team, we might receive some reports that something suspicious is happening. So, for example, someone within the organization might flag up the fact that a computer is quote-unquote behaving strangely. Now, that could be an indicator of an infection or some kind of compromise, but it can also be someone not knowing how to use their computer. So, obviously that you would need to respond to that in a appropriate way and kind of investigate to determine whether or not it is something that needs responding to. So someone from the incident response team should be responsible for monitoring reports that are coming in. If it's deemed to be an incident, then it might be given an ID, for example, put in a tracking system, and then some of the things that you might think about is how you name your IDs and what you're going to do with them. So if an ID for an incident is it could be like crit 43, meaning like 43 critical incident that has happened, that might be a bad idea naming it that way, because if you've got it in the subject of emails, for example, which is like not encrypted, or that could be leaked, then that kind of gives away information about number of critical issues that you've had and things like that, which as an organization you might not want to share some of those details. So if it's not an incident, then you probably want to tell the person who reported it and tell them how you've dealt with their query, even if it's just, we've investigated this and we believe it was a problem with the router or something. Give them some explanation about what you've done, because if they get nothing back, if they just get a blank wall and nothing back from you, they might stop reporting things to you. So you need to keep the lines of communication open. And then you need to assign the incident to someone within the team to actually take responsibility and organize the response to that. You need to think about the classification of the information about the incident. So is it public information restricted to employees, or is it confidential, for example, just for full-time employees, or secret, like a need-to-know basis, like that you only want specific people to know the information? And then you need to store it and communicate it in a secure way. So using encryption. If you're using email, then you might want to actually do email properly with proper encryption. So using either like PGP or there's various ways that you can secure email, but often email is not secured. But if you're using email to send this kind of like classified information or secret information, then you need to make sure that you're using secure email. And then you would give your incident a priority. do some triaging based on what the business impact is for the organization. For your initial response, you assemble your team, you respond to the reporter, you provide the information to the reporter, like the ID, manage their expectations, so give them a time estimate of when they can expect to hear back from you, and then give them updates about what you're actually doing. And if you use a ticketing system, it can help you manage the information about your incidents, similar to the same kind of ticketing system you use in other IT systems and IT support. But keeping in mind the security requirements. And then, as part of your response, you need to think about whether or not you're likely to involve law enforcement, because it might change the way that you actually deal with the systems and the data. If you're likely to need to have law enforcement involvement, then you need to be more careful about documenting everything that you're doing and preserving evidence. Say, for example, you think that you're going to be pursuing the attacker, then you want to make sure that you're preserving the evidence. Doing things like using write blockers when you're accessing hard drives so that you're not corrupting evidence and things like that. So you can do a bit more to preserve the evidence, but there are a lot of security incidents that don't get reported to law enforcement, and that's because there's always the risk of negative press and there is just a lot of attacks that happen in automated ways with automated attackers, and sometimes there's especially if there's jurisdiction issues, the attacks are coming from another country and it's an automated attack from a piece of malware, then to be honest, this might not be a lot you would get out of reporting it to law enforcement, although they would still tell you that you should do, because they want to know what the situation is. So there are things, so for example in the UK you can use via action fraud to report to the police that something's happened, cybersecurity incident, and so they do want you to do that, and you should do that because it helps the police manage the kind of local and national response to these problems. But as a selfish organization, you also need to think about what the trade-offs involved in that, and that should be built into your incident response plan as well, so that if you can do, you should report it to the police. And there are incidents where you're required to report to the police or report to various authorities. So one example of that is with GDPR. So whenever there's a data breach that involves personal data that's been breached, so information about a person, then GDPR, which is a European Union regulation which applies to the UK and all the member states of the EU, that introduces a duty on all the organisations to report certain kinds of data breaches to supervisory authorities within 72 hours where it's feasible. So there's a few things like where it's feasible, but basically you really need to report it. There are fines that can be you could be fined if you don't follow the GDPR correctly, and the fines can be massive. And that is, in addition to the reporting duties, there is also a duty to actually have appropriate security controls in place. And so you need to make sure that you have designed your security appropriately, and that you're managing the security appropriately. So if it's likely that the breach is going to adversely affect the rights and freedoms of some people, then you must also inform those individuals without undue delay. So you should be telling your customers, for example, if if a breach results in the fact that they could be adversely affected, then they should really be informed. So you need to keep a record of any personal data breaches, even if you look at GDPR and decide that well, under the regulations, we don't classify as having to report this. You still need to keep a record of all this stuff internally. So, the incident response team needs to be keeping record of everything clearly, have procedures in place to make the decisions about, do a proper analysis of GDPR code and how it relates to your organization, and have the procedures in place so that when something does go wrong, you have the decision making to actually do the reporting, for example. So then you really need to do the actual investigation to understand what's happened. So that's where you look at your log files, you do your live system analysis, and look at the systems that are potentially breached but are still running. You might decide to take them offline and analyze the hard drives. You look at your intrusion detection systems and what they're telling you. You might have some host-based intrusion detection systems like file integrity management. Look at what that's telling you. Look at all of that information, and look for something that's out of the ordinary that could explain or confirm the report. So, remember, the report might be wrong. Someone's told you there could be an incident. Well, maybe when you investigate, it turns out it's not, but you need to do that investigation. And then, make sure that you're logging all the details, and understand the time frame of when the attack or the incident happened. So it might be that when you look at it, the breach started 6 months ago and you didn't notice. So you start digging further and you really try and understand the scope of what actually happened. What did they have access to? How widespread is it? Is it just affecting one server? And what users were potentially breached, the personal data breached as part of the attack. So you really need to do some careful analysis to understand the situation as best as you can with the information that's there. And if you've designed your security system well, then you will have mitigated the chances of attackers covering their tracks. So you're doing your logging centrally and not just storing them on the individual servers that might be compromised, and and so on. Got good backups and security of your backups. So then you need to react to what you've just learnt, and you might decide that based on what your options are, what your policies are that you've previously decided based on your risk management plans, the decisions from people with authority. So you go to the managers of the organization and get them to make decisions about these things. You might decide to isolate the system that's been compromised. You can use firewalls, routing, do sandboxing, disconnection, shutdown. There's all different things ways you can isolate systems and software to make things secure, and maybe to facilitate further investigation of what exactly has happened. And you take systems offline, and then you've got any further data collection investigation. So you do forensic imaging, any legal action that you decide to take, you would take, or start that process off, and you restore your systems back to a secure state. So you might use backups and images. If there were any vulnerabilities and malware, obviously remove the malware. You try and look at what happened and prevent it from happening in the future. So review what security is in place and try and prevent future attacks of the same nature, and understand what the root cause was and how you can fix it. You might restore your systems to previous images, and then apply further updates to fix the problems that were exploited, for example. Put in more security defenses, so improve the countermeasures. So put in more policies and technical controls or administrative controls if it was a people problem, and process improvements, for example. So you go back, you improve all of those things as part of the resolution, and then at the end you write up what happened in a report. It's always a good practice to go about writing up what happened, and look at what you can learn from what happened for future events in the operation. So, as always, you might need to update your policies and procedures based on your findings. So then you update your incident response plans based on what's happened, and then you continue to monitor for the next attack that happens, and you do it all again. But it is a process. It's never ending. It's not a case of just putting a security product in place and you're now secure. You need to have these procedures in place so that you're constantly doing the security. Security is not just what's there, but you need to maintain it, and you're looking at the systems, making sure that they actually are secure, and investigating when things go wrong so that you can put them to right. So that is incident response.